quiet tension many of us live with every day. One part of us wants to imagine, explore, and invent. Another part wants proof, structure, and logic. We are often told to choose one or the other, but what if real innovation and real wellness come from learning how these two ways of thinking can actually work together? Welcome to the Wellness Reimagined, where we explore new ways of thinking about how we live, work, and create meanings of our lives. I'm your host, Shriya, and today I'm joined by Andre Walton, an inventor and designer whose ideas have shaped industries around the world. From creating technologies used globally to designing and building his own home from the ground up. Andre's life is a living example of balancing imagination with precision. Today's conversation is about balancing creative and deductive thinking and how that balance can unlock clarity, innovation, and more grounded way of living. Welcome, Andre. I'm honored to have you on my show.
I'm honored to be here, Shriya.
So, Andre, before we get into like thinking and style and balance, when you look back at your own life, what first showed you that creativity and logic were not separate paths, but something that needed to work together?
Um, that was fairly recent. I've always been involved in creativity. My parents were very creative, so I was brought up in a creative environment, and that showed me firstly that creative people do tend to create slightly different environments than people that are less creative. Um, so that was one side of that. Mm, I was actually a graphic designer when I left school, and then in my early 20s, I started to invent things. So, that creativity definitely filtered down to me. One of the things that really showed me, well, there are two things that demonstrated to me that we have these two distinct ways of thinking. Um, the first, and I wrote about this in my book, my first book that was published in 2011. That just came from observation, really, in the sense that when I'm a coach, I'm a certified business and life coach, and when I was coaching people that were very stressed or that were burnt out, I would see what I call the hamster wheel effect. I would notice that they could not get out of the way of thinking that was related to their stress or their burnout. And it was very I call that convergent thinking. And then towards the maybe 10 years ago, we started to have this incredible invention called fMRI, functional MRI, and where you could actually see patterns in people's brains as they were thinking things. And so when they were thinking logically, deductively, certain neurological patterns lit up. And then if you switch that to creativity, get them to do a task that involved thinking creatively, different patterns would light up. So
Mm.
that really was a sort of visible proof that the concepts I've been working on earlier were reality. And there are many, many more ways that we can demonstrate this, but these are two totally different ways of thinking. So if we have a problem a challenge that we're working on, we have a very real choice as to whether we look at this from an analytical perspective or whether we look at it from a creative thinking perspective. And the really important thing about this is that the worldview, when we're thinking deductively, is convergent. And when we're thinking deductively and analytically, we use phrases like we focus in, we drill down, and creativity is quite the opposite. If you have been around young children and watch what they do, I mean, every day they will come to you with something different to try and make sense of their world. Maybe it's an object, maybe a bar of soap, will suddenly they'll pretend that that's a cell phone. Um, it's as if they were using their mind in the same way as putting a jigsaw puzzle piece into a puzzle. You have to look at the whole picture to see where that piece goes, particularly if you haven't got a picture on the box lid. So that requires that we look divergently. And that analogy is more than just an illustration. It really is about looking divergently when we're thinking creatively. So if we're stuck in a thought process which is convergent, and we this is how we think when we're very stressed. We cannot see the world outside of a very narrow range. I think of this as a like a racehorse that's got blinkers on. You can just see going forward, and that's it. You can't see the whole world around you. And the problem with that is if you get stuck in that thinking pattern, it seems as if you have no future, or there's nothing, you can't see what the future is. It's not that you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's that you may not even be able to find the tunnel. And that's how people think when they're stressed or burnt out. So, one of the things that I've been working on is ways to use creative thinking to counteract that process. So think of that convergent process, that analytical deductive process, using a microscope. We're continually trying to focus in, focus in, focus in. Whereas creativity is like using, you're a photographer with a wide angle lens, and you can see that it's much, much more of the world. So, if you put those two concepts together, one can neutralize the other. So that is sort of one of the ways of looking at this choice we have of thinking creatively and thinking deductively. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that is like a very beautiful answer. I think you explained this really, really amazingly. And also, many people believe you are either a creative thinker or a logical one. So, in your experience, where do you think this belief goes wrong?
Well, I think it's pretty easy to prove that we were all creative thinkers when we were children, when we were young children. And what happens, we think very differently when we're young children because we had no history. When,
Mm.
when we're born, there is no historical data for us to use when we're trying to make sense of our world. When we've become adults, it has been shown that what we actually do, if we have a challenge, it might be a trivial challenge, sort of, am I going to stop for a cup of coffee, or am I going to have a cup of tea, or it could be, we're moving house. What sort of house do we want to move to? So, whatever the challenge is, what our brain does, the subconscious runs off to its memory banks to see if we've encountered anything similar previously. And if we have, we use that as the framework to make our future decisions. And excuse me, it's a very efficient way of making that choice about what we're going to do, what route we're going to take, because it saves us a lot of energy. Thinking as if everything is new, um, is actually very energy intensive. We use as much energy thinking in that way as we do when we're going for a walk. So using this process saves us time. We haven't got to think the whole thing through from the beginning. And it also saves us this, cognitive energy. But what it doesn't do is include creativity, because basically we're saying, oh, however we did it before, we're using that as the basis to do it again. So there's nothing creative about that. That's just, you know, that's just picking up a mold and saying, this is what I used to make this object before, and I'm going to use that mold to make that object again. When we're children, we haven't got that capacity because we haven't got any history for our brain to say, have we seen this before? Because we clearly haven't. So we have to think creatively. We have to look at our whole world and look at whatever some new thing that we discovered or some new idea or a choice that we're going to make, and we have to look at everything around us because we don't have that pre-written script. So anybody that comes to me and says, I'm really not a very creative person. Well, that may be true now because that's how you've trained your brain to be, but that's not doesn't mean that you were never a creative person. And the beauty of all that is that if you're trying to use creative thinking to help yourself or somebody else get over stress or burnout or whatever, you're not you're not trying to get them to do something they've never done before. You're actually trying to reintroduce creative thinking into their neurological portfolio, into their toolkit. And so it's a very positive approach, and it can be very efficient.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is that this false divide can limit both innovation and well-being. Like when we level ourselves too narrowly, we stop accessing parts of ourselves that could actually support better decision and deeper fulfillment. And I'm really curious, where this imbalance start. Like, do you see it coming from more like education or work culture, or how we are rewarded as a society?
Well, that's a really great question. It comes from our society, and it's not. We didn't always have this imbalance. I mean, if you go back to much earlier civilizations, I mean, you could even go back 3,000 years to uh, the era when Vedic science was created. And if you look through history, it is staggering that gravity was never described until 1666. And yet, if you have a look at, say, the Vedic sciences with Ayurveda for medicine, with Stapatya Veda for architecture, you have all these processes that have been brilliantly contrived to make our world better. There is no mention of anything like gravity. So I think between between the kind of era of the Italian Renaissance right through the Industrial Revolution to where we are today, we've gradually been trained to be more and more technologically oriented. It's
Mm.
technology, technology, technology. There hasn't been really any revolutionary processes that have gone on outside of that to any major degree. If you have a look at, for instance, the so-called Industrial Revolution, that's just called that because there was, there were revolutions in industry, but there were also incredible revolutions outside of industry. You had the research done by Charles Darwin. You had literature. You had revolutions in literature. You had revolutions in music. You had revolutions in painting, and we don't have that now. We've through um, computers, through the internet, through now AI. We've got these incredible technological revolutions, but we don't have the equivalent revolutions in non-technology based processes. So all the time that you're focused on technology, you're really focused on this deductive analytical way of thinking, and you see that in the news, in questions people ask, in what they talk about. And it's I think it's a society-driven trend, and it's one that we personally can, rebalance. And I believe that balance between the 2 is very, very important because there's a level of satisfaction about being able to use analytical thinking when it's necessary, and creative thinking when that's necessary. And what it means having creative thinking in our toolbox is if we start to feel ourselves being overwhelmed by the logic driven society that we live in, then we can take a step back using creative thinking to a point where we have that creates resilience to many of the things that end up stressing us.
It sounds like balance is not accidental. It's something that develops through experience, feedback, and sometimes learning the hard way when one side dominates too much. And like even with awareness, we fall back into old patterns. So when you notice yourselves leaning too far into either creativity or deduction, how do you recalibrate?
Well, the important thing to realize is that these are two distinct neural pathways. So it's not as if we would sort of gradually change our way of thinking back to, let's say, the deductive way. It would be at the turning point when we have to make a decision. It's like a Y junction in the road. Then we have a definite choice, and if we decide, well, eventually, when you've been thinking about this and doing little exercises to change your life, it becomes intuitive to say when you have a choice to make, what route am I going to take? Am I going to take the creative route or the deductive route? And if you start to take the deductive route, you will notice. I mean, you will start to become, generally speaking, you will start to become more stressed because a lot of things that we're making choices about in this world, we often like to try and make them sort of 1-0 kind of choices. In a sense, if I do this, this will happen, and this won't happen. Well, that's not actually the way the world works. I mean, sometimes it does, but most of the time it doesn't. There's something that happens. There are gray areas between making one choice and making another choice, and that doesn't get accommodated with deductive thinking. So, if we notice that we're trying to set ourselves goals that are either black or white, and that's not playing out, we know that we've made a poor choice in terms of how we got to that position.
Yes, I think that that patient space feels really essential. Like balance is not fixed state, but something we return to again and again, especially during transition and high stake moments. And this is truly, truly an amazing conversation with you. And if after this my listeners want to connect with you, then what's the best way?
Um, I have a website which is um, Dr. Andre, 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 at Plan for Change, PLAN, the number 4, CHANGE.org. And that has everything about the programs I run for burnout and a few other things. And there's also a link on there if they would like to send me a message. And we can start a conversation. I'm always very pleased when people wish to continue the conversation about creative thinking.
Yes, and I will make sure to attach all these details and links below so that the listeners can find them easily and get in touch with you. And for my listeners, thank you for spending this time with us on the Wellness Reimagined. Today's conversation is a reminder that balance is not about choosing one side of ourselves over another, but learning how different parts of us can work together. If this episode resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on where you might invite a little more curiosity or a little more structure into your life. And as always, we look forward to continuing this journey with you in the next episode. And do not forget to hit the follow button, subscribe, and feel free to share your thoughts because your ears deserve premium content. Thank you.